The most critical thing I can teach you, and that is what I do, or attempt to do, is that without your brain, our world is going to die. You have to recognize that there's more to life than just what you want. So again, we'll just try to encourage you to think a little further about the consequences of what you do and how it's going to turn out. We'll go to immigration, and the reality is that everybody, every human being is the same. We are equal. I don't care whether your color is black or white or whatever, it doesn't matter. We are actually equal. We were given our lives. You didn't make it. You just suddenly appeared. And your parents didn't build you either. Your dad didn't create you. Your mom didn't create you either. Your life simply is a miracle, and we'll just leave it at that. Nonetheless, your ability to comprehend what it is that you do and what the others do, and the consequences of that are very, very important to our future. It didn't used to be, but today we are 8 billion people, more or less, and we are growing at 1 billion more people per year, or well, 1 billion more people per decade, 100 million plus more people more to feed every year. And the consequence of that is that, where is the food going to come from? Where is the water going to come from? You have issues about food and water today. Well, in 10 years, there will be another billion people all needing and wanting and so on. And of course, all the young people, all the babies that don't need a whole lot right now, will need more in 10 years. It's a never-ending cycle until people die. So we look at immigration and understand that with a massive amount of humanity suddenly appearing on this planet, they are invading everything. They are making enormous amounts of creatures extinct as well as plants. They're attacking the ocean, and just the garbage that they create is a tremendous problem. And even your brain comes into function at this point, because even you can understand that the consequence of another billion people standing here in 10 years, for every 8 people there are today, in 10 years there will be 9. For every 8 cars there are on the road today, there will be 9. And the next decade after that there will be 10. Well, actually in less than 10. But, the consequence is that we cannot do what we are doing today. And immigration is a reality of life, because overpopulation is a reality of our world. That means we absolutely must control our population, because the universities and people who wanted them to be have managed to, in some fundamental ways, stop as much death as possible, and that leaves more of us taking more things all the time. So immigration is going to happen, whether you like it or not. And the only way we can stop immigration is not with walls and things like that, but with the reality of birth control. Birth control is very critical to this world. There are no other options. Birth control is absolutely essential. And unfortunately, that primarily falls upon women, because women are the people who make the babies. Men just contribute a tiny little bit, and from that point on, it's all woman. Or more realistically, you can have 1 million men and 1 woman, and you probably are not even going to get 1 child. Maybe, maybe not. On the other hand, if you have 1,000,000 women and even just one man, with today's technology types of things, you could probably end up with at least 1,000,000 children in a couple of years. I mean, the reality is you can't stop. Birth control is not about men. They don't make babies. And that's the reality. So it is about women and their choices. And it is a woman's body. And therefore it is a woman's right to make these kinds of choices. And it is their duty to enforce them among themselves and so on. Men are not involved. They're not allowed to be involved because it's not their body. So, I leave that to your brain to work on. If you continue to refuse to work on, or if you ignore it, as the universities did do. In the 60s, they tried to have population control, and nobody would pay attention. That was, what a few of them did. And when no one paid attention, the universities simply abandoned the idea. But they were smart enough to know that overpopulation was going to take over this world. And then they started trying to grab everything they could for themselves. You've got to get it now because, tomorrow is not going to be here. And it's true. If you do not curb overpopulation, you will not live on this earth much longer. And that's just assuming you survive the other threats that are so clearly prevalent here. The biggest one, of course, is that people are trying to ignite sunfire on Earth, which is the burning of atoms. In other words, you can't remove the fuel. Once ignited, it takes over the planet, just like it took over the sun. Anyway, let's just try to understand something simple. And something simple is what birth control is not abortion, or abortion is not birth control. That's not it. A living creature inside does have some physical rights. But so does a woman, or, men are on the sidelines. They don't really have a say. And that means that every child that is born today, where there is an option for the woman, it becomes her responsibility to make a decision because, you own your body. We can't make it for you. It is yours. And in that right is the reality of what it means to have a child, and for that matter, what it means to have pregnancy for 9 months and deliver a child and the whole business. That whole thing belongs to women. There's no issues, there's no ands, and there's no buts, and no men should be involved in the realities of what they decide. So, given that, let's just look at the reality of it for a moment. And the reality of it is that in the first 40 days or so after initial conception, after the act, for those 40 days or thereabouts, there is no real recognition of humanity inside the womb. And by that I mean it is a living thing, but it's not really a human thing. And you can argue that 1,000 billion different ways, and I'm sure you will. But the consequence of it is that we make different decisions for different stages or different types of creatures. And of course, if the living embryo does continue to grow, it will certainly become human. And you can argue, well, that's the end result of it, so that's the reality of it, and so on. But the fact is that a woman does have a right to make choices, and a lot of women get into trouble or get pregnant by men that they do not want to be the dad of their child. So mistakes are made. Young people make mistakes. On and on and on and on it goes. And I'm going to suggest to you, you have to make your own decision, but I'm going to suggest to you that what constitutes an abortion, if you wish, or the elimination of the embryo, the growing fetus, or whatever you want to call it, in the first 40 days or thereabouts, is a fair and legitimate action or reaction of a woman to have. You know, it's early. It's not developed to the point where there is, critical humanity involved. And so it's her choice, and it should be her choice, and nobody should argue with her at all. But, you have the probability of being able to recognize that you are pregnant within that time is fairly certain. So you have an option. You have a choice. And you should make it properly. And with, a real, honest a decision that is important to you. So, that is your decision. It can't be ours. It can't be mine. It's the woman involved. Period. Beyond 40 days, however, where a living embryo or a living fetus or the beginnings of humanity arise, the issue changes. It literally does. And then you end up when it changes to distinctly human, then of course it becomes a whole different issue. And society can have some degree of say, not as men, but as women involved. Men are not involved. You contributed the sperm, that's it, that's all you did. You have the opportunity or the responsibility in some ways to support the child once it arrives, but as far as the pregnancy goes, it is strictly woman. So she decides. And women decide about her, kind of thing after a certain amount of time goes by. You can decide for the days yourselves, but of course, when distinctly human becomes real, the reality changes. So whether it is appropriate to have an abortion at that time, I would say to you, no, it is not. Because you did have your chance earlier. If you change your mind, well, sorry. There are people, unless of course there is simply no one to take your child, not even you, don't want it. That's a whole nother issue. It really is. It's a whole nother issue. There's a critical reality of, if a child is known to be able to be born, but is going to have severe bodily defects or mental defects, that is another issue in itself. And although those people are very critically equal to us all, the reality of living with that body is entirely different than the reality of living with a body that is whole and working, perfectly as we can expect. And the people who just won't let a child die literally cause the child to experience 1,000 deaths instead. How is that better? While you might want to keep your child, you might think there's nothing more important than this, and so on and so on. The reality is you are forcing a living being, your child in that case, you're making decisions that cost them the surgery and the chemicals and all the things that are going to happen with a body that doesn't work well. That is your decision, and you are forcing them to endure it. you should reconsider. Is that what you would want? Literally, that's the choice. Is that what you would want? Do you want to die 1,000 times? Or you just want to have peace, love me a little bit as you can, and let me go? Which is better? In a world of 8 billion people, where we face starvation in the near future, and all kinds of terrible things because, nobody is taking responsibility for their actions or making decisions that are respectful for the reality of this world, or the reality of life itself. That's bad. So, I'm suggesting to you that you should make actual decisions, not just fight with each other because you like to fight with each other, because in that way you can make an enemy out of someone, and then you can personally have some kind of distinct winner-loser experience. Well, this isn't about winning or losing. Life is not about winning or losing. Even if some have more or some have less, life is not about winning or losing. It's about the experience and the expression of what you can and cannot do with your freedom and your mind. The idea of buying toys or having slaves to do things for you, that isn't life. That's just living. There's a difference, actually. I think it's probably enough. Think about your future. Use your brain. Think about our world. You don't get to make choices if you don't make choices now in the future. I mean, once you have made the decision to drive 100 miles an hour at a dead man's curve, let's call it, cliff on the other side, once you've made the decision to go screaming up there in a vehicle at 100 miles an hour and to the point where you can't stop anymore, there's only one outcome to that. And we are, as a world, screaming up to the dead man's cliff, or whatever you want to call it, and about to go over the edge at 100 miles an hour, because nobody wants to take the responsibility and make the decision that is necessary to protect our world, to survive our future, or to just be respectful of life itself. Do you like to play? Well, playtime is over. You fight for your world with law, because if you don't use the law, you just lose everything.